Hello guys, welcome. Alright, so today I'm going to be doing a short presentation on population ecology. Alright, so make sure you have your notepad and importantly your textbook. So the objectives for today is to define the term population, understand the factors that affect population, natural rate of growth, understand why human population is not limited to some constraints as other organisms or other populations. Alright, so let's go right into it. What is a population? A population is a group of organisms that belong to the same species. So if you look there on your screen, you should be seeing two pictures. One of the population of sheep and a population of seals. These are not really Jamaican organisms, but we are aware of them. So as you can see, it's a group of organisms, all of them belong to the same species, so we call that a population. And once they are in the same species and they are occupying the same space, then we call it a population. Note also that you can have more than one population existing in the same space, and when we have more than one population existing in the same space, we call that a community. Right, so that's an addition to our lesson today. So the population, we describe the population in terms of the size. So we can have large populations, small populations. We describe it, another feature is the density of the population. We also have dispersion, but we're not going to look at dispersion. But if you look up what the word disperse means, right, a synonym would be to spread. So we're talking about the spread of the population, but we'll be focusing on the size and the density. So let's look at the population density, and that is just talking about the total number of individuals per unit space. So if you look at box A versus box B, you will understand that box B would be a more densely populated box because we have more individuals within that confined space, as opposed to box A, where we have a smaller number of individuals within that confined space. So when we talk about the density of a population, we're talking about the number of individuals within a particular space. Alright, now the population size just refers to the number of individuals, and what we want to talk about with population size is how the population size, or the number of individuals that make up the population, whether that number will increase or decrease, or what are the factors that lead to an increase or a decrease in the population numbers. And as you can see there listed, there are a number of factors that actually influence the number of individuals that are within a population. So first one, there is food, and it is obvious that if we have a lot of food within a particular space, then we expect that the numbers will increase. You will have more and more organisms becoming the numbers will continue to increase because food is available. Once food is there, then we have more organisms that will take up the food. Also space, if the space is adequate, if you have a lot of space, then you have obviously will have area or space for more individuals. So once you have space, then the numbers will go up because there's adequate space there to hold them. If the space is, usually the space is fixed, so what will happen is that once the numbers continue to increase, then that space can become a limiting factor on the rate by which that number is increasing, because once you go beyond a certain number, then the space becomes limited. So there we say that the space can become limiting to the population size because it is fixed. So if we go back to initial example where we look at the population density. Once the density increases, then you know that we're going to run into some problems here, because people start bungle up and bounce up on each other. The resources such as food now start to become limited, right, when space is limited. So just wanted to understand that space can limit the size of the population. Another term there is predation. Predation refers to predators feeding on the prey. So as long as the individuals there in the population are a prey, or they have a predator, if the predators number increase, then the population number going to decrease, because the predator is feeding on the organisms. So you have to take that into consideration, that once the natural predator for a population, once their numbers increase, then the population of the prey, the organisms that they feed on, will start to decrease, right? And vice versa, if we don't have any predators feeding on these organisms, then obviously their numbers will go up. Competition really comes from the fact that we might have overcrowding. And when we say we have competition now, we have a set space, so people might compete for space, people compete for food. All right, so because the resources are going to become limited now, and the resources that we're talking about now would be the food and the space. So once they start to become limited, then people start to fight for them. So that's where the competition comes in. Now when competition comes in, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. The loser is the one that dies, so that leads to a decrease in the numbers. Right, so competition only has one effect, a negative effect. It will decrease the size of the population. Another one here is disease, and disease only has one effect again. It's a negative effect on the population size. Once there is a disease that the organisms or the individuals in the population are susceptible to, then the numbers in the population will start to decrease. All right. Natural disasters now. Natural disasters such would include things like hurricane, things like flood, drought, a volcano. Alright, so when you have things like those, what you will find happening is that the effects of natural disasters can be so severe that a lot of organisms can die. Let's say, for example, in a drought, when we have drought, a lot of plants die during the drought, and a lot of animals too, because water is a source of life. And if water becomes scarce, then organisms will die. And we have the opposite of a drought. If we have too much water, that leads to flooding, can drown off a lot of organisms. When certain plants cannot tolerate a lot of water, so it can wipe out certain plant population. Just like that, hurricanes affect birds and other animals. They can become stranded in hurricanes and stuff like that. And debris, something knock them down during the storm and kill them off, and there might be a lot of them at the same time. So things like that affect the population in a negative way. Volcano, just the same, right? So these things, you can read on them, they actually have negative effects on the population. Immigration really means that you have animals that are coming into, their immigrants are coming into the population. This can have two effects, and I put the invasive species there in red because invasive species really have a negative effect on the original population. So if we have an original population of certain rats in a environment, and because they are for some reason, like a mongoose, or let's say a chicken, we have a chicken population, you have a chicken coop, and in your chicken coop you have your chickens. The lizards and all the other insects that are around are not invasive, they are part of the population. But if for some reason a rat gets in your chicken coop, is an invasive species and is going to become a predator, and is going to wipe out your chicken population. Right? Also, we can look at it in a different sense, as if we have some chickens that are in a different area and they migrate and come over to certain chickens that are in a different area, they are actually adding to the population. So you can have immigrants that come in that are not predators, they can just join the family. But you can have immigrants that come in that are predators, we call them invasive species. Well, they are both invasive, but in this case, where you have predators that come in now, they will decrease the numbers of the original population. But if you have other species that come in that are of the same species as the original, then they can come now and add and increase the numbers. Emigration is actually the opposite of immigration. So we are talking about people leaving the population now. That will have a negative effect as well. The numbers will decrease. So these are a summary of basically certain factors that will affect the size of the population. A lot of them have positive effects, but once they can also become negative, as in they can also limit the size of the population. So when we look at the growth now, the rate at which the population grow, or the speed at which the population grow, right? We know that that's also going to be affected by the factors we listed before, but we want to look at what is called the growth curve. The growth curve is really standard right across the board for all organisms, all populations. Good. And it is divided here into 1, 2, 3, 4 phases. The first phase is where we call the lag phase. So just like we hear they say, boy, you just lagging behind. We're talking about a slow phase, and the reason why this phase is slow is mainly due to the fact that at the beginning of this population, in the early stages, we only have 2 usually, right? You can have more than 2, but when we compare that to other population that gone off long time ago, you know, they are at a faster rate depending on the amount of reproducing organisms. So at the beginning, in the earliest stages, you have very few organisms. So you have 1 male goat, 1 she goat. The rate at which they will increase their population is dependent on how long the she goat takes to produce a new organism, and how that organism take a time to reach the reproductive age so that they can breed and reproduce again to grow, and then the numbers will start to increase. So in the beginning phases it is slow because you have few reproducing individuals, but as the number of reproducing individuals increase, then the rate at which the reproductive rate now of the population is going to double, triple or quadruple depending on the amount of individuals that are there now. And remember that the conditions must also remain favorable. So conditions such as the amount of food, space, and the ability to overcome and resist diseases and stuff, to avoid predators and if there are any, right? These must be good, and once that is good and you have a whole heap of females that are able to reproduce, then the reproductive rate is going to be exponentially high now. So we're not looking at 1 or 2 groups, 1 or 2 females with the ability to reproduce. You're looking at 5, 6, 7, 8 females reproducing at the same time. So the rate of by which the numbers are increasing now are going to be very high. Alright, so that's the exponential or the log phase, right? The log phase is this part here. So you see there's a sharp increase in the numbers in a short period of time. The diminishing phase now is when those environmental factors start to kick in. Those now start to slow down the pace at which the population was growing, right? And then now into the stationary phase is where it reaches a balance, where the number of individuals that are being added to the population is now going to be equal to the number of individuals that are being lost from the population. We call that the stationary phase. And when we get there, that is the balanced number, that is a number of equilibrium where the environment is able to sustain all of them within adequate space, adequate amount of water, adequate amount of food and so forth, right? So we call that delicate balance the carrying capacity of the environment. Carrying capacity is the amount of individuals in the environment can carry and provide them with the adequate resources that they need. So that's the growth curve. Make sure you read it over, because you know you're not getting everything in the presentation, but you're getting the essential points. Alright, so as I said before, carrying capacity, as you can look on this diagram here, this jar or bowl, whatever you want to call it here, it has 3 fish. Everybody is happy, everybody looks good, they get enough food, they have enough space, enough air dissolving the water, so on and so forth. But if you keep adding individuals more and more and more, that's not going to be enough food, that's not going to be enough space, and somebody, if not everybody, will die. So if you exceed carrying capacity, this on your left is likely the end result. If you maintain the carrying capacity, then this on your right here is your likely result. So that delicate balance in the population, right, that carries out, that the environment carries out on the population, is basically shown here. Once you have these good things on the right, then the population will continue to increase. If these things now on the left start to happen, poor food, inadequate space and so forth, then individuals will start to die off until we reach back balance again. Right, so that's what the diagram there is illustrating. Here is another diagram that is showing you that you have, when you have a predator-prey relationship, as illustrated here with the snowshoe here and the lynx. The lynx is the predator and the snowshoe here is the prey. So these two, their population will fluctuate up and down, but the snowshoe here population will always be higher, but never less than, can be equal to but never less than, to the population of its predator, because the predator feeds on it. So if its population will always be higher, so that this predator, the lynx, will always find them to feed on them. The predators are always in smaller numbers compared to that of the prey. So we can analyze how the predator and prey relation, population or numbers go up and down depending on other things over a period of time. That's what the graph is talking about. So we understand the factors that affect population and how the population grows. Now when it comes to the human population, now there is a big difference. If you look on the graph right here, you realize that from the 1300s all the way up to the late 1800s or early 1900s, there is a steady increase in the human population, from just under a billion to just over a billion. But something happened in the 1900s. There is now a sharp increase all the way going up to 6.5 to onwards to 7 billion in the 1900s, leading up to the 2000. What happened there? Why isn't this population experiencing a transition phase where it starts to slow down based on the fact that the environmental conditions now start to influence the population size? Just like how we look on the other organism, we know that after reaching to the lag phase, then we are going to have a diminishing phase or a transition phase that slows down to a stationary phase. But if you look on the human population, it just keep going up and up and up and up, and we are 7 billion and climbing, and our predicted rate is to continue to go up all the way up to 10-12 billion. So how is this possible? That's the question we need to ask. How is it that the human population just exponentially grow and it's not stopping? Although human population is subjected to the same constraints as every other population, as they are, humans have actively worked to overcome these limitations. So how have they overcome limitations? Let's say, for example, space. How have they been able to overcome space? They have done things like created apartment buildings. So if anybody has ever been to New York, as New York are one of them cities, you have other cities too, like Dubai and even London, Canada. You can see some massive apartment buildings. What they do is that a whole heap of people can live in this small space. So space is not a problem for us. We can create buildings like this, can hold a lot of persons. So they have done things like that. If you look again in China and Dubai, they have places that people, the man them use technology. They just dump up parts of the sea and create one island, and a whole host of people just go over there and live, just like you're seeing in this picture here, filling the coastal waters. We kind of did that with Portmore in a sense, how we kind of dump up over there. It wasn't really a real dry dry and beautiful place that like it is now. It was like a swamp before, but we dump it up and build it up and make a whole heap of big place over there now. They even want to make it the third city. Can you imagine that? Now look at forest clearing. Caymanas Park or Caymanas Club, something about Caymanas. You just dump that, mark that off and now and get them big bulldozer and bulldoze down the trees and stuff like that, dig down the hillside and make one big nice housing scheme for whole heap of people that live again. So we clear off some of the forest areas and create areas for housing. This one kind of exotic in a sense, but you have persons who actually live in their boats, in their yachts. Some big super rich people can buy a yacht, just live in it. So we're not limited to one little area again. We expand. We use technology and we expand our environment to cover a whole heap of different spaces. Alright? So that's basically how the human population has used technology to expand their environment. Another issue that they would face is food. So how they overcome food now? So what they did, they used technology again and they improved their farming practices. They add fertilizer, they create insecticides and pesticides. They do tissue culture. They use tractor and they do whole heap of farming. They spray with plane. Them make certain resistant. They do genetics again and do make resistive. Put genes that are resistant to different pests and diseases. So then crops continuously grow, and they use genetic engineering and they modify the food. So they used to get one small sweet pepper, you get one big sweet pepper. So you start making a whole heap of food. So even though the numbers are increasing, we just use technology and we increase the food just the same. When you talk about even your livestock like your pigs, your goats, the cows, right, the chicken, because if you look on the fowl, them white fowl, it's common fowl used to take all 2 year or a year if you grow, if you make a rooster big. No, 6 weeks and 3 weeks and you get one whole heap of chicken. So we just have to produce food. We don't have a limiting factor when it comes to food. Alright. And the next thing we can look at is diseases. So say one disease can just wipe out one population like that. When it comes to mankind, then constantly study disease. So then use then science again and then technology. And they study disease, so then develop medicines, then develop different cures, pills, then develop education and teach people how to do proper sanitation and take care of themselves. So they use all of these things and they overcome the prevalence of diseases in their, or the susceptibility to diseases in their environment. And also they produce things like vaccines, right? And right now you know that there are vaccines going around to help to prevent diseases, so less people die from diseases. They use genetic engineering again and they modify genes, so that people can actually detect if they are susceptible to certain diseases just by doing one genetic research on themselves. Yes, man. So we use technology to do all of these things and we overcome them. So therefore, we're not stuck. Our population is not limited to these things. All right. So we are able to overcome. And if I have one shark out there for you to, we know if we create gun, dynamite, and all these things, and we can get rid of them. So we now have no predator. If lion used to eat, we can take gun and shoot them too, because we create all of these forms of technology to defend ourselves. So our population has now continuously increased. So the constraints of food, space, and all of these things and diseases are not limiting to the human population. They continue to increase. Alright, so let us now summarize what we have done today. So we have looked at what a population is. It is a group of organisms belonging to the same species, and we know that the size of the population can be affected by food and space, predation, overcrowding, which is leads to competition, diseases, natural disasters, and emigration, such as invasive species coming in. Emigration, you have members of the population leaving. Those can affect the size, and other factors as well. The growth. We know that the growth curve has 4 phases: as the lag phase, the log phase, the transition phase, and finally a stationary phase. And we know that the carrying capacity deals with the total number of organisms that the environment can sustain. And finally, we know that man has been able to use technology to overcome all the challenges that their population face, and so therefore they continue to grow and grow and grow. We are 7 billion and we keep going and going. So these are the things that we have done, right? So we know we even use technology now to track even hurricane and natural disasters. We build buildings that able to withstand earthquake. We know where our volcanoes are, so we avoid those. So we have used technology, and we have now overcome all our challenges and our limitations. Alright guys, that's the end of the presentation. Hope you learned something. Please, if you need to get this good, you can go back and watch the video again and again. Take your textbook, pick out where you can add in some notes, and you'll get this. This is easy for you. So have a good day, and thanks for watching.